You know, I feel like the 6th generation was by far the best in gaming. Seeing how Generation 5 was mostly about experimentation with the new 3D graphics, and Generation 7 and 8 were trying to take things into a more realistic route. The PS2 era was just perfect in my eyes, though. Seeing how the graphics were good enough to finally be taken seriously with games like God of War, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, Eternal Darkness, Triggerman. Wait, how the fuck did this get here? And Onimusha. However, the graphics were still quite primitive, so they were able to get away with more goofy and cartoony games like Kingdom Hearts, or Beautiful Joe, or Whiplash, or my favorite, Ratchet and Clank. Plus, there were so many games from that era that a lot of them had just been forgotten over the years. For better or worse, but that leads us to today's little oddity. This is the Mark of Kri for PlayStation 2.
The Mark of Kri was a first-party action-adventure game, published by Sony and developed by Sony's San Diego studio, released for the PlayStation 2 in 2002. Sony San Diego is mostly known for developing all of the MLB games no one plays, Little Big Planet Karting, and Pain?
Does anyone remember Pain? Does anyone remember that one? Anyone? Nah, who cares?
Anyway, this was actually their very first game. It must have made a good impression because it actually got some really good reviews upon release. The game is best known for having very unique visuals, which makes sense. It was designed by former 2D animators from Disney, causing it to look like an odd CGI sequel of The Emperor's New Groove, mostly because the main character of the game looks a lot like Kronk to me.
And enough about the history of the developers and the art style. Is the game still worth playing today? Let's find out. Now, even though I do have a physical copy of this game on PlayStation 2, I'm going to be playing the digital version on PlayStation 4. Seeing how it's easier to capture and I got it on sale, so fuck it.
The game is set in a fantasy world heavily inspired by Polynesian culture, with the typical, "Many years ago, big bad evil was a thing, but it was stopped and boom, forgotten. Now it's about to make a big comeback, so here we are." In all seriousness, this story, though cliched, is still cool with the idea that this dark spell, which would pretty much end the world, couldn't be destroyed, but was instead split into 6 pieces among 6 families. Again, pretty basic, but this opening cutscene does make up for it with its awesome hand-drawn presentation.
This intro is absolutely bleeding with atmosphere due to the game's art style, musical score, and of course, the slow yet booming voice of the game's narrator.
Through this rift will come an army of darkness, a powerful force enslaved to its master. This army will then crush this world and enslave its people.
At first, I thought this was the voice of the late Japanese-American actor Meiko Awamatsu, who you may know as the voice of Uncle Iroh in Avatar The Last Airbender and Aku in Samurai Jack. Alas, it is not Meiko, but is actually Hawaiian character actor Keone Young, whose talents have appeared in Scooby-Doo, G.I. Joe, and a bunch of DC properties. Honestly, his voice is perfect for establishing the mood of this game. It's dark and grim, yet super hokey.
I love it.
You play as a young warrior named Rao Utu, who is about as swole as a man can get. Seriously, look at this fucker. He gives Terry Crews a run for his money. We start out in an optional training session with Rao's mentor, Baomusu, who shows us the basic combat mechanics of the game, which is best described as a 3D beat-em-up.
With a twist.
Similar to other first-party PlayStation games, like Ape Escape and Rise to Honor, the game tries to experiment with the still relatively new DualShock controller, where the right analog stick is used for combat mechanics as opposed to controlling the camera like most games. However, unlike Ape Escape and Rise to Honor, which use the right analog stick to actually attack an enemy directly, Mark of Kri actually assigns a certain button to an enemy. It's difficult to put into words, but the way it works is to use the right analog stick to point in the direction of one of 3 enemies at a time, and they will be assigned one of the 3 face buttons, X, square, and circle. And when you press the assigned button, you'll attack that targeted enemy automatically. You can run up and hit enemies with the X button without assigning any inputs, but seeing how the game doesn't have any fluid camera controls, I wouldn't recommend it, especially if you're up against a group. He also teaches you the basic of using combos, which you can only use if 1 or 2 enemies are targeted, essentially meaning you use whatever button is available, which would either be circle or square. They are visually pleasing and can be useful when up against one of the more powerful enemies, but a lot of the time, they only work when they want to, and when you're up against a large group, it can be suicide. So just mashing the button hovering over the target is just as effective. Bamusu also teaches you how to use your spirit guide, who is a hawk named... Kuzo?
Kuzo. Kuzo? Okay, you know what? I have a theory. I think that is Kronk from the Emperor's New Groove, but he decided that he didn't want to be Yzma's assistant anymore, so he moved to Polynesia to become a warrior, but first, he gave Kuzco one more potion, turning him into a hawk and then taking away his memory. He then changed his name to Rao Utu, but that took up way too much thought for our dear old Kronk, so he just said fuck it, and took one letter out of Kuzco, making it Kuzo. He then taught himself how to become a barbarian, and teaching Kuzo how to be a clairvoyant spirit guide.
Anyway, Kuzo is used to get an idea on what lies ahead, meaning you can see where each enemy is and strategize a proper plan of attack. To control Kuzo, you press the L1 button to focus, and look towards a perch with the bird icon. When the icon glows, press L2, and Kuzo will fly to that perch, and from there, you can look for another vantage point to fly towards. But taking a look around isn't the only thing Kuzo can do. He can also activate certain switches, distract enemies by disturbing a flock of birds, and if you fly towards these golden bird icons scattered throughout the game, you'll be given new story details, which is a pretty cool way of building up this fantasy world. To switch back to Rao, simply press the triangle button, and vice versa to go back to Kuzo's point of view. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but am I the only one who finds it weird how training NPCs, especially in early 2000s games, actually say the name of the buttons you have to press to perform certain actions?
To attack this dummy, press the X button.
Press the D-pad left to move left, and right to move right. Press the D-pad up to move forward, and down to move back.
Follow me. To jump, just approach the edge and keep pressing forwards on the controller.
According to my research, all you have to do is get near them and hold down the circle button, and you should perform a super sneaky Master Thief move.
That kind of breaks the immersion, doesn't it? I mean, is that what the characters in the game here as well? I feel like it would get kind of awkward and even confusing.
Now, my young Padawan, to block, press the L1 button.
What L1 button?
Ow! To block, press the L1 button.
What button? It's not on the saber! Ow!
To block, press the L1 button.
There's only 2 buttons and they don't say L1!
To block, press the L1 button!
Alright, rookie. To take out those aliens and save our planet, all you gotta do is point, press the R2 button.
Hell yeah. Wait, what?
You point and press the R2 button.
What R2 button?
On the top of your controller, the right-hand side, R2.
Controller? This is a gun, you idiots!
Just press the R2 button, come on!
Okay, we're almost home free. Just hit the X button and maneuver with the left analog stick. Drive!
What X button? What analog stick?
Right there on your controller, man. Just hit the X button and use the left analog stick. Come on!
What are you talking about? You mean the gas, the shift stick, the steering wheel?
That's what I said! The X button, the left analog stick! Come on, the kill's gonna be here any minute! Come on!
Did you take your medication this morning?
Nope.
For the love of everything that's... Oh, fuck!
Should've pressed X when you had the chance!
You dick!
Well, that's it for the training, so let's start the actual game. You go back into the local tavern and talk to the bartender, Rongo. And is it just me, or does he remind anyone else of Paige from Beyond Good and Evil? Well, even if not, his voice should sound familiar.
Anyone trying to get here is being robbed, or worse.
He's played by Darren Norris, the voice actor who plays Cosmo, Jorgen von Strangle, and Timmy's dad in The Fairly Odd Parents. He's asking us to take care of some bandits who have set up camp in a nearby forest and are scaring people away.
He's also nice enough to give us some alternative missions.
Well, maybe I've got some other work around here you could do. How about washing down some tables for me, or mopping the floor? Well, maybe you can help Tati clean dishes, or sweep up.
Well, fuck that. I'm not going to that forest. It's dangerous.
So we take a trip into the forest for our first mission, where you really start to notice how beautiful this game is. I mean, it may not seem like much by today's standards, but for 2002, this looks pretty fantastic. Just look at the 2D drawing and the loading screen transition into 3D. It's just amazing. Sorry for another interruption, let's get back to Mark of Kri. So just some bandits, huh? I'm sure all we gotta do is rough up a few of them like Rongo said, and the rest will just be scared off, or...
brutally murder them?
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
This is when you remember this game is rated M, and for a very good reason. It is goddamn violent as hell. You show absolutely no mercy towards your enemies in this game. Hell, you can shove a sword in someone's ass.
Ew!
Sometimes Rao even puts his sword through an enemy's... private area. My god, this is from former Disney animators, and this was the direction they decided to go with? I mean, it's not a problem, I guess. It's just not what you'd expect. But whatever, it's cool. Except for that crotch stab.
Seriously, developers? What the hell?
Rao control's pretty heavy in this game, but that's understandable. I mean, just look at him.
One thing that gets annoying is that if you run into a wall, you just stop dead in your tracks.
You mainly notice this in the taverns between levels, but the main game is pretty open, so it's not really a big deal. The combat is pretty smooth now that we can see it in action, and you can even unequip your sword if you really want to punch the shit out of your enemies. This is not recommended at all, but it can work against weaker foes, and I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of funny to look at. One big handicap is hitting a stone wall, causing Rao to stumble back and allowing enemies to get the jump on you. Or hitting a wooden surface, causing your sword to get stuck and Rao taking his sweet time to pull it out. Now this doesn't sound like too big of a deal, but later in the game, enemies will really like to hang out by the wall, and refuse to move away from it. Luckily, the enemies in this stage were so easy, it might as well have been a tutorial level.
Actually, now that I think about it, there are a bunch of prompts in this level that tell you everything you learned in the tutorial, so what was even the point?
I mean, I know the training was optional to begin with, but this makes it straight up pointless.
Hell, you actually learn more from the prompts than you do in the training.
Like to block, you press R1. To control the camera, you press L1, which just repositions it. Now it does suck that there is no free moving camera controls, but this system does work and you do get used to it. To save your progress, you collect these scrolls that are scattered around each level. They are pretty spread out, especially in later levels, and you can only hold 4 at a time, so use them wisely. It's actually possible to break yourself if you save during a challenging moment, especially if you're low on health.
This never happened to me because I'm just that awesome. And because I always made sure I had enough health before saving.
I still died a lot in later stages, and it sucked having to lose a lot of progress, but hey, it's better than having to restart the entire level. Yeah, I think it's time to mention the game's difficulty, because it's up there in challenge. I mean, it's not as hard as games like Maximo, I guess, but if you're impatient, you will get your ass kicked.
So in that regard, the game is difficult, but I wouldn't really call it frustrating. I'd say it's just right.
However, one thing that may get on your nerves are Bamoose's challenges. There's 4 to 8 in each stage, and you'll probably get most of them in the first 2 levels just by playing the game. But later in the game, they started to become really confusing. Like, hit a close enemy behind Rao, but continue to face the enemy in front using the sword? What the fuck? Who came up with this? Luckily, these challenges are optional, and to be honest, there is no real reason to do them. Unless you want to 100% the game, but I personally wouldn't recommend it. Now don't get me wrong, there are rewards for completing the challenges, but we'll get to those later. I almost forgot to mention there are 5 pickups in the game. The save scrolls, as we've established earlier. The red health stone that refills between 25 and 100% of your health. The white health stone that increases your maximum health until you take too much damage. Arrows for your bow, which comes in later. And a tuku. There is 1 tuku in each level, and if you collect them all, you apparently get some special reward at the end of the game, but I didn't bother looking for all of them, so I don't know what it is. Whatever. When you get to the final area and defeat the last of the bandits, you step into a ring of fire, thus ending the level. Rao is now hot shit, being the talk of the town and making Bamusu proud because he completed a mission for the greater good, and not for payment like a sleazy bounty hunter. This is where they introduce Rao's sister Tati, who's played by Hayden Panettiere. Yes, that Hayden Panettiere, from shows like Heroes and Nashville. Some might be a bit surprised they got a big name actor like her to play the role, but you have to understand, she was just starting out at the time, and actually did other video game characters as well, like Kairi in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, before being replaced by Alison Stoner.
Actually, I forgot to mention, Wally Wingard, who played Rufus in Final Fantasy VII Advent Children and the Riddler in all the Batman Arkham games, plays Rao in this game. How weird is that? They got an actual really credible voice actor to play this character and they didn't even give him any lines. Just a bunch of grunts and battle cries.
So when you're back in the tavern, you meet a cleric named Maruku, who is, or was, the guardian of some ancient temple, but was booted out by more bandits. Not surprising, I mean, look at this guy. I mean, he shakes like a bowl full of jelly. How is he supposed to protect anything, especially on his own? Apparently the bandits weren't after any treasure, but instead some piece of leather parchment, and Maruku doesn't tell us the importance of this. Likely because he doesn't know himself.
What kind of a guardian are you?
So after hearing about your one successful adventure, he thinks you're the perfect candidate and offers you a bow and arrow if you succeed. This level is eerily similar to the last one, but with much more enemies, meaning you'll have to use a lot more stealth mechanics, meaning Kuzo will actually be useful. He lets you take a look at enemy placement and behavior so you can determine how many enemies you have to kill and in what order. To stealth kill, you unequip your weapon, in this case a sword, and sneak up behind him without alerting anyone. You target your enemy like any other combat section, but the button icon blinks until you get close enough to make the kill.
And if you thought Rao was brutal before, he's downright relentless in stealth mode.
You can also stand against a wall waiting for your enemies to come around the corner, and these kills are so sick. But the coolest method is to stealth kill 2 enemies at once. You sneak up behind 2 enemies facing away from you, and 3 buttons will pop up. Hit them in the right order, and watch the carnage. There are 2 enemies in particular you need to watch out for. Archers, and enemies that carry horns. You can see which enemies carry horns thanks to Kuzo, and if they're alerted of your presence, they will call in the cavalry to bring you down.
So make sure you take him out as soon as possible.
Another thing you can do when your weapon is unequipped and you're up against an enemy is hitting R1 at just the right time so you steal his weapon and throw it right back at him for an insta-kill. This is pretty hard to do and apparently it gets harder the more you do it, so I wouldn't recommend it unless you're trying to complete a challenge, or you just want to see how cool it is because, yeah, it's pretty fucking cool. In this level, you also get more details on the game's lore thanks to Kuzo. You find out that the 6 families that have the Mark of Kri literally have them. It's actually a birthmark passed down. And when the one bearing the mark dies, the next one born in that bloodline gets the mark.
It's later hinted that if the bloodline is killed off, the mark won't rot with the rest of the body. It stays there. That's just creepy.
Upon completion, you go back to the tavern and meet with some shadowy figure. He asks you to retrieve a leathery piece of parchment.
Sound familiar?
From the dark forest and bring it back to him. And he will pay you with a bag of gold, going against Balmusa's teachings for helping others out of the goodness of your heart, and not for money.
And boy, doesn't this guy just look all nice and cuddly and just plain trustworthy? I mean, listen to that darling voice.
Rao, I am an old man trying to understand the breadth of my line. Let us say that this document will allow my family to re-establish its proper place in society.
Terrific. Just terrific.
So you go into the dark forest, but now you have a bow and arrow in your arsenal.
This bow kicks ass. I mean, you make most of the enemies in the game your bitch with this.
It's obviously for stealth purposes, and it works by going into focus mode and aiming at just the right spot of your enemy. Your target will have a blinking X icon over his head, meaning you need to adjust your aim. Once you're aiming at the right spot, the icon will turn solid and you're ready to fire. This is pretty cool for the time. They could have made it just aiming your enemy's general direction would have been enough, but no, the position and distance of your enemy determines whether or not your shot is lethal. Some enemies, however, have armor now, so the arrows are completely useless against them, hence the X icon being crossed out. It's also good to know they finally changed the enemy's designs, and this new location, though not a huge difference, is super atmospheric. This is also the level where the game's difficulty starts to go up. It's mainly because from here on out, the levels are pretty damn long, making items more spread out, so use those save scrolls wisely. God, this scene where you're surrounded by trees and are up against multiple enemies, both on the ground and in the trees shooting arrows, sucks the big one. Why?
Because your sword keeps getting stuck in the trees. I swear the designers just put this in here to piss me off.
After collecting the parchment, you return to our old friend, Mr. Cuddly.
And look, he brought his friends.
He's not even trying to look innocent. He has threatening bodyguards, a commanding voice, and a face like Voldemort. He gives you the gold in exchange for the parchment you found, and you're on your way. But Rao suddenly feels uneasy about what he's done.
Gee, I wonder why.
You then meet a psychic in the tavern who tells you the painfully obvious, that Rao has been tricked, and the gold coins he was given bear the symbol of the Kasai, which are the enemies under the control of Mr. Cuddly. Maruku even claims that they're the ones who took over his temple in level 2. Wait, does that mean the enemies in level 3 were guardians like Maruku?
Oh boy.
The psychic then tells you how important you are to the fate of the world, and to go to the mountains in the north to find a sacred tree in the middle of a fortress. Apparently the tree is an oracle, and eating the fruit will guide you on your journey. This level is pretty good. Graphic-wise, it's definitely the most unique, being a snowy mountain setting. Gameplay-wise, it's more or less the same as level 3 with no major gameplay additions. The main difference is that it's more balanced, meaning you'd use both combat mechanics as well as stealth. I feel like you use Kuzo in this level a lot more too.
And watching Kuzo take his sweet time to fly to a perch, it's just hilarious to me, because my mind immediately jumps to this.
You also encounter a new enemy type who is an axe-wielding tank. He's pretty damn tough, but with enough patience, he goes down like all the rest. There's a very interesting bit of exposition Kuzo finds where it talks about the backstory of the tree. Apparently, when evil reigned, a god with a trusty spear weapon fought back, and during the final battle with the demon, he plunged it so deep into his skull and was so exhausted afterwards, he just left it there. And over the years, the spear grew into a massive tree. That's actually really cool, and fits in with the established lore of the game. One part of this level I absolutely hated was a part where you had to fly Kuzo to a perch, do an overhead kill on an enemy with a horn, then stealth kill the rest. Now this doesn't sound so bad, but you have to repeat this 7 times.
7?
Fucking 7.
Well, yes, but I'm 7.
Well, at least there's no way the game can get even more tedious, right? Right? Right?
The final stretch of the level is kind of a pain in the ass too, mainly because it's pretty difficult to kill the archers quietly without alerting the others. You then fight 2 axemen and get to the tree. Rao then takes a bite from the tree's fruit and gets visions while the elegant voice of the oracle tells him what's going on. She starts by once again telling Rao how awesome and important he is, and that the Kasai are some ancient group who worship the dark gods. If you thought that was painfully obvious enough, guess what she calls the villain?
The Dark One, as you call him, is also evil.
The Dark One? Wow, that's That's just so original. I mean, man, how on earth did the writers over at Sony San Diego come up with that name?
Sir, do you think it's a little too on the nose? Nah.
Well done. Well done. You've earned this round of applause. Oh yes, you've earned it. Well done.
She also tells you that the parchment you gave the Dark One was skin that held one piece of the Mark of Kri. This also means that that's what the enemies in level 2 stole from Maruku's temple. The Oracle then tells you that the Dark One has already found the first 4 pieces of the Mark, and that the 5th one is safe, but the 6th is on a boy who's about to be sacrificed by the Kasai. She then gives you a spear made from one of her branches and sends you on your way. Before starting your new mission, you speak to Baomusu, who explains that he is the last in the line of protectors and that he expects you to take his place after his death. Protecting what and why, you ask?
Now for me, this twist was actually painfully obvious, but I'm not going to reveal it just yet, just in case anyone wants to find out on their own. So, I'll explain later.
Baomusu then teaches you how to use the spear, which is identical to the sword except slower, stronger, and can target 6 enemies instead of just 3. So it's recommended that this be your primary weapon during the next level. Level 5 was by far my favorite. It's the perfect balance of strategy and action. The setting is great too. You start out at the docks, but work your way into a dark, fiery temple. One really cool part is where you have to pull multiple levers to open a gate, and they are scattered throughout the area, and each one is surrounded by a different group of enemies, all of which require a different plan of attack. Another great section is where you're waiting for a boat, and endless waves of enemies attack in arena-style gameplay. My favorite stealth section is where you're up against an armored archer, who can't be killed in the middle of the area. You have to keep an eye on them with Kuzo to determine who to attack next, and where to hide to keep out of their line of sight. It really keeps you on your toes. Once you get into the temple, you encounter the Dark One again.
Now we're starting to get into spoiler territory, so if you really don't want to know what's going to happen, skip to this time frame.
It turns out the boy you were trying to save was already dead, and they obtained his piece of the Mark. They were just using him as a diversion to get Rao away from his village. Why? Because Rao is the only one who could protect his little sister Toddy, who bears the final piece of the Mark of Kri.
Yeah, I already figured this out. Baomusu wasn't too subtle.
You then fight these awesome looking zombies and run back to your village to find it in ruin and everyone dead. You find Baomusu clinging to life, and he tells you that Toddy is still alive, but will be sacrificed by the Kasai soon. Before taking his last breath, he passes down his trusty axe to you. And now, it's time for the final, and worse, level of the game.
So why is this final level so bad, I hear you asking? Well, most would just assume that it's extremely difficult, especially for a game like this, but it's not hard. Not even a little bit. I'm going to repeat that. This final level is not hard. The reason it's so bad is because it is long and fucking boring.
The level takes place in an admittedly awesome dark fortress, and you soon realize those zombies from the end of level 5 are now the default enemies. And since you have the axe, which operates like the spear except much more powerful, this level is completely action-oriented.
Now that's not a bad thing. Hell, I was actually kind of relieved, because despite the fact the game is labeled as a 3D beat-em-up, it's actually pretty strategic throughout most of it, so I saw this as a breath of fresh air, a new change of pace. So, what's the problem? What do I have to complain about?
Well, take into consideration, this game is only about 7 to 8 hours long, but there are only 6 levels. So to make the game longer, with the exception of level 1, each level clocks in well over an hour long. Hell, I think a couple were almost 2 hours.
Now you'd think this level would be a lot shorter, seeing how it's more combat oriented like the first one, being maybe an hour tops. But no. It's fucking longer.
It took me almost 2 hours to beat this level, and it's nothing but combat with identical enemies and identical rooms. No change of pace, no strategy, just go into a room, fight a few waves of enemies, go into the next room, fight a few more waves of enemies, rinse and repeat, and that's it. Hell, you never even get to use Kuzo here, he's completely useless. I think you only need to use the bow twice in this level. Other times, I use it to take out enemies in doorways. That's another thing. The AI just took a nosedive in this level because the enemies refuse to approach and attack unless you get really close to them. And they always stand by these walls, so get used to the sound of your axe bouncing off stone. The only time you use one of your other weapons is when these little shit fucks steal your weapon and you have to get it back, but guess what? They go down in one hit, so they're just there to annoy you and make the level longer. Oh wait, they changed it up a bit. Instead of just going up to the doors and opening them like in the first half of the level, now you have to hit a lever. On a wall. Right next to the door.
What the fuck was the point of that?
And it just keeps going and going and going. I even said fuck it a couple times and tried my luck by running past a bunch of enemies to get to the next doorway. I kept praying that the next room would be the last, and that lasted for about an hour. But once I got to the final section where you see the Dark One getting ready to sacrifice Toddy, my heart skipped a beat. I was so relieved that the game was almost over. So, do you fight the Dark One head on? I mean, there were no other bosses in the rest of the game, but Silent Hill 4 only had one boss at the end, so maybe they'll do that here. Nope. Guess what you do? Take a wild guess. I dare ya. I double dare ya. I triple dog fucking dare ya. Take a guess.
You fight the same enemies as before. Fuck!
Are you kidding me? More of this shit? Well, wait a minute. The Dark One lifts his arms and casts a spell. And what does that do? It summons more enemies.
I don't particularly care for this whatsoever.
So after fighting another wave of enemies, he sends his 4 personal guards on top of another wave of enemies. And what are they like? They're exactly the same except with red armor.
Of course! Because why not?
I swear, when I got to the very last enemy, it took forever to kill him. And when I did, I braced myself for another wave. But that was it. Once I got to the final cutscene, I cried.
I am a grown man who is not afraid to admit that I cried because this boring, long, tedious, shitty-ass excuse of a final level was over.
The Dark One realizes that he's fucked, and in a last-ditch effort tries to convince Rao to join him. So the guy whose home you destroyed, friends you killed, and sister you were about to sacrifice, yeah, he'll totally be on your side.
Finish him, Rao!
After you give him a splitting headache, you save Toddy, and the game ends with the 2 of you preparing to hunt down the rest of the Kasai, indicating more adventures to come. One other small twist is that the narrator of the game is actually Kuzo.
Neat, I guess.
Oh, thank God that's over. Upon completion, you can go back to the tavern and replay any stage to beat Balmoose's challenges. And when you complete each one in a level, you will unlock an arena based on that level's setting, which is cool, I guess. The arena has 2 modes, time attack and body count, which are pretty much the same thing. And if you beat them both, you unlock new costumes and concept art. I only took the time to unlock one of the costumes, which is pretty much a Conan type thing, and that's cool, but I was too worn out to go back and get the rest. It's just not worth it to me. And those tukus, they just allow you to use any weapon in the level you found them in. So I guess they're good for those who want to complete some challenges easier, but for me, they're worthless.
So that was the Mark of Kri. Very experimental in the gameplay department and cliche in the story, but overall, still a fun experience.
It has a great setting, a simple yet badass protagonist, and a rich atmosphere. Though at times it shows its age, it still looks really nice and is a lot of fun, except for that final level.
Now, as Kuzo said, Rao and Tati do go on more adventures, or at least one more adventure, with a sequel, Rise of the Kasai. Now, I haven't heard much about this game, but I'm hoping for the best. So when we meet next time, we will be going over Rise of the Kasai. I don't know how long it's going to take. It could take a couple weeks. I'm pretty busy with work and school. So, until then, so long and have a lovely day.